Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to the first Burton Suite charity catch-up of 2022. It feels slightly strange to be saying Happy New Year when it's almost February, but Happy New Year to you. It's great to see you. Welcome if you are a regular, you've been along to one of these events many times before. And a special welcome to you if you're here for the very, very first time. We're really pleased that you've joined us. My name is Ed Marsh. I'm Head of Charity Development at Burton Suite, and my colleague Cecile Gillard, Charity's Legal Manager, is also here today and will be presenting. Just to explain a bit about the format of the event today. So we're going to be together for an hour, and we're going to take a chance to take you through some content, some thoughts, some particular themes today, and then there'll be some questions, a chance for questions and answers at the end of our session today. So if you've got things that you've kind of been storing up that you'd really appreciate sort of bringing to the group and to answer together, then we would love to hear from you. There's two ways of doing that. One is that the chat function is in action, so you can post something in the chat for everyone to see at any time during the event. And if you post, you might want to post some resources, some ideas in there. It actually might be posting some questions in there, and we'll look at those and address those, as many questions as we can towards the end. But also when we get to that point, what we'll do is we'll take everybody off mute if you'd like to, and people can ask a question out loud and share together as we come toward the end of our time. You will have heard a polite lady at the start telling you that this event is being recorded. And that is so that people that miss the event can catch up afterwards. Perhaps there's things that you really appreciated hearing about today that you wouldn't mind going over again. So we're going to send out copies of the recording, just to make it clear that no names or faces will appear on the recording other than Cecile's and mine, unless you come on screen to ask a question later on. So after the event, we're going to ask you for a few things. We're going to send you an email asking you for some feedback. We shape these events and the content based on the needs of those that come along. We would love to hear what you thought of the event and what you'd love us to cover in the future. But also we'll send you probably tomorrow now a copy of the recording and also the slides that we're going to be using today, so that you can refer to those again. You know, we do these events to serve you. We do these events to serve the sector. It's part of our service to the charity sector, and we really hope that you find it very helpful today. And our agenda today is this. So we're going to be looking today particularly at charity accountability and transparency. Accountability and transparency is at the very heart of what it means to be a charity. We're going to be considering trustee duties and responsibilities. We're going to be talking about your public reporting and how you can be telling your story well, some of the pitfalls to look out for, some of the things that we see and difficulties we see in practice. I'm going to be talking to us a bit about the latest developments in the charity statement of recommended practice and where we're at with the new charity sort. And then there's been some recent new guidance on charities operating online, which we want to let you know about. And then the usual chance for us to kind of share any latest bits of news and developments there are to staying up to date, and do store up your questions for the end. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Cecile, who's going to kick us off with trustee duties and responsibilities.
Thank you, Ed, and hello everybody. Lovely to see you all in this first session of the 2022 period, as Ed said. So I'm going to start out by having a look at some of the big picture things and then hone in on some specifics in relation to accountability of charities. As you probably recall, charity trustees have a number of general duties, and these are overarching, and they relate to everything about how they deal with their charity, how they manage its affairs, how they lead it, and how they are publicly responsible for it, as well as responsible in legal terms. So there are general duties of charity trustees. That's, of course, the start point. And the critical one really for the kind of areas we're exploring today is the general duty to ensure the charity is accountable. Notice that the charity is accountable. Part of that is about trustees being accountable, but it goes beyond just trustees being accountable. And it's a duty, and that means trustees have a legal requirement to follow that duty, to fulfill it, to do something effective about it. So, duty of trustees, clearly it's something trustees should concern themselves with, but in order that they can do that, and in order that the duty to ensure the charity is accountable, can be properly fulfilled, other people need to care. It's really important not to see this as just a matter for trustees. We have a real mixture of people with us today, which is great. And one of the things that we really value about these sessions, some of you are trustees, some of you work for charities, some of you volunteer for charities, some of you have other roles in charities, and some of you have a variety of roles in a variety of different charities. But the fact of charity accountability and its importance and its effect is something anybody in the charity sector needs to be caring about and in some senses involved with. Therefore, being committed to openness and accountability, yes, that's part of what being a trustee is about, but it's very much also what being a staff member or a volunteer in a charity is about, that commitment to openness and accountability. Also really important that we understand there's a need to nurture a culture where openness is the norm, where we start from a position of being open. What is accountability? Well, it's about demonstrating proper responsibility for leading and caring for the charity. How you do it? Well, you do it by providing satisfactory evidence of matters and satisfactory reasons for things. Why something was done, why that was the outcome of what was done. So it needs more than just information. And I think quite often, particularly when we're looking at the public reporting aspects of accountability, but also in our communications, perhaps we too readily simply report activity, facts, sometimes rather basic and limited facts. We don't interpret it for people, we don't explain. We do need interpretation to help people understand what was done, why was it done, what was expected to be the outcome, and what in reality was the outcome. So the underlying aim here in ensuring that there is a duty of accountability which is actively pursued, the underlying aim is to demonstrate that the charity is being looked after well in the public interest. And the key outcomes of good accountability should be reassurance in three core areas. That the charity is being operated within the law, that the charity is being well run, and that the charity is being effective in what it does. Now, that effectiveness in what the charity does should be demonstrably appropriate to that charity's charitable purposes, and it should be clear that it's providing relevant charitable outcomes to that charity's purposes. It's important to ensure that those who are given delegated authority within the charity are accountable for acting within that authority and using that authority within the specified boundaries. That's true when the trustees have delegated actions, so they may have taken a decision and the staff are implementing the carrying out of that decision to begin a new service, to close down a particular location. And it's also true when they've delegated any lower level decision making. For example, the day-to-day management of the charity being delegated to the staff through the senior management team and down through the chain of staff that the charity has. And in most charities, of course, the involvement of trustees as well on some of the delivery aspects. So they may have delegated some of the delivery. And in many charities, there will be quite a lot of delegated delivery, inevitably. But that's delegation of the detail, the management, the practicalities. What, of course, trustees can't do is delegate the taking of the key decisions or the governance responsibility for the charity. That always sits back with them. Those remain with the board of the charity. In practice, therefore, what all this means in relation to delegation is trustees need to be crystal clear about what has been delegated and who it's been delegated to: staff, volunteers, perhaps board committees. They need to keep proper records, and they absolutely need to receive adequate reporting, and they also absolutely need to challenge and monitor effectively. I think we quite often do see cases where the trustee board may receive reporting, but that isn't necessarily used in a positive way to challenge, to test, to make sure. And all those things need to be done to ensure that the accountability is carrying on within the charity, therefore enabling the external accountability. The Charity Governance Code starts with a presumption of transparency, that a charity will be open about its affairs whenever it can, that it should only keep private the limited number of things that really need to be kept private, to protect people's safety, their privacy, to observe the law on something where something must not be in the public domain. So the relevant principle in the code is that the trustees lead the whole organisation in being transparent and accountable. Again, the whole organisation. The rationale for this principle is to keep and to build up public trust, because that trust provides legitimacy and aids success in charities as a whole and in the individual charity that you are involved with. Open two-way communication is encouraged, very actively encouraged, where you celebrate successes, and most of us are fairly good at doing that, or perhaps more readily think of it, even if we don't always do it, but also demonstrate where you've learned from something that was perhaps not so effective. That, I think, is harder to practice as a norm, to get your head round as a good way of operating, but it is part of accountability, to recognise when things have not gone as well as you hoped, when outcomes have not been what they were expected to be, where there may have been a moderated level of successful outcome. And as you're thinking about being accountable, of course, a critical question is, so who am I being accountable to? Who are the charity's stakeholders? I'll give you a quote. I won't, of course, attribute it. This was either, make it up in your own head in case you may have heard something similar, a senior charity manager or a trustee. It is not relevant to us to explain our work to the public. We only explain to our members because we're a membership organisation. That was said to me within the past 7 days. Okay. Now, that can't be the right answer to who your stakeholders are. I do think the Charity Commission core guidance on trustee duties is not overly helpful here, because it does focus really, in some senses, too narrowly when it puts quite a lot on accountability to members of a membership charity, which can put you in a slightly wrong direction when you're not a membership charity, or when you are a membership charity, but you have a wider accountability. And of course, you always do have a wider accountability, because one group of stakeholders in every charity, no matter what that charity, is always the general public. It seems to me in many ways you need to start from that premise. Ultimately, first on the list, the general public as our stakeholders. But then, of course, move on to think about your circumstances and who else are stakeholders, beneficiaries, supporters, donors, other funders. Yes, regulators, Charity Commission. You could well have others like the regulator of social housing or Companies House. And you'll have internal stakeholders like your volunteers, your members. Yes, your members, of course, are very important. And when you're thinking about how to reach them, you need to think about what are the appropriate ways to provide meaningful and understandable material that helps your accountability. You can think about this in terms of your website, your emails, your newsletters, your donor communications, all those methods we have beyond the ones that are perhaps more obvious. And think about the honesty and the clarity of the information and what message people will get when they read it. It really isn't true in virtually any charity that 100% of a donation will be spent directly on the charitable work. That is not open and honest in virtually every situation. Think about your messaging and how that's honest and clear. But within that, be creative and enthusiastic. Thank you, Ed. Move us on. So those are some general wider thoughts about accountability, some specifics where there are opportunities and responsibilities. There are legal rules on disclosing in your communications and in many cases at your premises, particular details about the charity. For example, if you're a charitable company or a CIO and you use an operational or trading name, virtually every charity has to disclose its registered charity number if it is a registered charity. If it's not a registered charity, the charitable status disclosed in other ways. There's a lot of detail on those rules, and we're not going to address that detail today. But the point to remember, I think, is that it affects an awful lot of items, electronic and hard copy, should certainly be on all websites that the charity uses, and in all your communications, whatever those communication methods are. And why wouldn't you put the details on everything, particularly the charitable status and charity number? But yes, do put the other required details, because you want to encourage support for the charity, to demonstrate willing transparency, and to identify the right organisation. Underlying point of these rules is to ensure that the public and anybody dealing with the organisation knows who they're dealing with, knows it's a charity, and is aware of other important features, and can be in touch with it and those who are responsible for it. The AGM is a great opportunity for accountability and transparency. The governing document may require you to hold one. You may have the option to do so. It's important, of course, as an opportunity to inform members and other stakeholders about the charity. Think about who those stakeholders could be in that context. Who could you invite as guests to the AGM? Major funders or donors, local MPs and councillors, community representatives perhaps, people from partner organisations, to enhance accountability and transparency. And think what you do after the AGM. Do you share any key information more publicly after the AGM? Very few charities seem to do that, and that's often a shame, because if some important, helpful material about their transparency was talked through, it could be that it's better shared more widely. Of course, preparing the annual report and accounts, and we'll come on to those in a few minutes. Make sure they're done, make sure they're right, make sure they're filed on time, but use them more widely, put them on your website. And the charity annual return. Most charities have to file an annual return every year with the Charity Commission. The trustees must be responsible for what goes in that. Someone else may help with some of the mechanics, but the trustees must be responsible, understand what they're saying to the Commission, and be satisfied that it's correct, open, honest, transparent, that the Commission will be given information it can genuinely understand. And of course, if you're late, the Charity Commission website will show in red how late you were. And then serious incident reporting. The Charity Commission requires trustees to report serious incidents, proven or suspected. It expects full and frank disclosure, and it expects a prompt report. A serious incident is an adverse event that results in or risks significant harm to beneficiaries, funds, assets, property, or work or reputation. Now, a good culture of internal accountability will help firstly identify when a serious incident occurs. It will encourage people in the charity to alert those in authority that something appears to have happened. It will also ensure the Board of Trustees is made aware promptly so that it can make a serious incident report where that is appropriate, make a report to any other authorities, such as safeguarding authorities or the police, and ensure damage is prevented or at least minimised, and take protective action against further harm. Now, doing all of that is also critically part of being accountable when you are unfortunate enough to find yourself in such a scenario. Ed, thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. We're going to spend a while now thinking about the annual report and accounts. And if you've been to one of our events before, this might be a very familiar comment to you, but I know that many of us here are in finance roles or have a particular kind of finance leaning. I myself, I'm an accountant amongst my kind of many other things I'm involved in. And so actually we very naturally think about annual report and accounts in very kind of numerical financial terms. But quite often I pose questions to the team or to clients like this. In this case, which charity do you think was more successful? Is it Charity One that had donations of £300,000 and expenditure of £280,000, or was it Charity Two, donations of £100,000 and expenditure of £100,000? And of course, people think about these things in all kinds of different ways. Isn't it wonderful? Charity One has raised more money. And actually, of course, it's made a little bit of a surplus. Isn't that wonderful? And then other people say, well, it's not wonderful because charities should make profits. And then someone else said, well, Charity Two, they spent all their money. That they've been successful. That's what they're all about. And of course, the real answer to this question is that we just cannot tell from numbers how successful a charity has been. A charity is all about pursuing its charitable purposes. And how do we know from very simply looking at some income and expenditure numbers whether that has indeed been the case? The reality is this, that there is always a story to tell to be able to understand how well a charity has performed, what it's achieved, what it's been able to do, and what it's all about. And really, that this concept is at the heart of the annual report and the accounts. It's why quite often for many, many charities, the words part, the explanation part is so much longer. The trustees annual report is so much longer than the numbers part, because it's so important to tell the story of what the charity has been doing. And so that's what the trustees annual report is all about. It's saying, what is the charity seeking to do? How is it going about it? To what extent has the charity achieved what it set out to do this year? To what extent is it looking ahead to the future and having those kind of plans for the future and knowing what's going to be happening in the future? How is it structured? How is it governed? How does it undertake its day-to-day work? And that's what a trustees report is all about. And actually, the charity statement of recommended practice, it sort of lays out, this is ideally what the whole annual report and accounts will do together. They will help us to understand, help the reader of the accounts to understand outputs, to understand outcomes, to understand impact. In other words, what is it that has been done? What has actually been achieved, and what difference has been made? And actually, I think the panacea of charity reporting, the ideal thing is that there's this kind of harmony of the numbers and the words that go together, that one explains the other, that the other kind of unpacks what the words are saying. But I think also, I review, I don't know, probably about 100 trustees annual reports every year. And I would definitely say that the very best examples I see are those where it's very clear that those putting the report and accounts together have decided to go beyond the basic minimum, tick the box, say that the minimum we can get away with. And actually they say, we've got an opportunity here to tell our story, to say what's gone on. And actually it's true to say that good storytelling, it stands out. I was considering the other day, so Simon Sinek's written this book, I think Start With Why it's called, and he talks about the golden circle of storytelling. And actually it's so relevant to charity accounts. Start with your why, and then your how, and then your what. Consider how that story is told. Also, I think that in the modern age, we need to be considering about how we present things in our annual report as well. I think that we need to we need to recognise that reality that a picture speaks 1,000 words. We need to recognise that quite often, perhaps an infographic can really unpack the impact. And of course, we're not all in a place to be able to put those things together. We all haven't got those resources to do, but what are those simple ways you can do? You know, we used to say all the time, oh, we'll never put any pictures in your account because Companies House will probably reject them. Actually, just anecdotally, I think Companies House have been a lot more lenient on pictures recently. I mean, people's experiences are different, but whereas actually, if you're a CIO, you're an unincorporated charity, go to town with your colour, go to town with your demonstration of what the charity is achieving and what it's doing. I think it's really important, as Cecile's already mentioned, that we have a transparency mindset. It's going to be a base level presumption that charities are going to be transparent in their reporting. And I love these two words. For me, they're a real help. And I quite often say these to charities. Actually, think to yourself like this. I need to explain and I need to justify. I need to unpack something that might not be completely obvious on the surface. So have those two words in mind, explain and justify. And is increased transparency simply about making it as long as possible, putting as much detail as you can in a trustee's annual report? Actually, I don't think that is the case. I've seen examples where people have kind of copied and pasted their entire risk matrix into their trustee's annual report. I would say that's really unhelpful in lots of different ways. But actually, increased transparency is not clutter. It is focus. It is actually a way to talk about the most important things in a very clear, transparent way. The charity statement of recommended practice talks about the trustees' annual report being fair, being balanced, and being understandable. Being fair and balanced means that, as Cecile's already mentioned, you don't just mention the highlights, you mention the lowlights too. You mention some of those challenges, some of those things that have really impacted on the ability of the charity to deliver in this particular year. There's something about being fair and balanced that really engenders real confidence in a charity. Actually engenders this sense of, actually, these trustees are aware, they are proactive, they are involved, they appreciate the ups and downs, and there's a confidence, I think, that comes through from sharing not only the ups, but also the downs. Just very technically speaking, the charity statement of recommended practice has these suggested headings to use for the trustees' annual report. And just to say, they are suggested headings. These particular headings are not compulsory. You can use whatever headings you want to. However, the content that the sort contains, that content, it is mandatory, it is needed, and it's split into requirements for charities that have income below £500,000 and those that have income above £500,000. And those above will need to be much more expansive in what they say in the particular areas required. And so just, we're not going to go through them line by line, but just to sort of give a feel. So under objectives and activities, there's a need to summarise the purpose of the charity. More on that in a minute. There's a need to talk about the main activities that you have undertaken in relation to the particular charity purposes you have, to explain the projects and services that are identified in the accounts. Actually, if you're a larger charity, if you're above £500,000 income, there needs to be a more detailed description of the shorter and longer term aims. If you are a charity involved in grant making, you need to be explaining your grant policy and how grant making contributes to you achieving your aims and objectives. If you're a larger charity, you also need to be talking about the contribution of volunteers as part of your activities during the year. And then achievements performance. Usually, for smaller charities, it's really a kind of summary of the key main achievements in the year. What is the difference that the charity has made? And if you're a larger charity, you need to be talking about the measures or the indicators you use to assess your performance. You need to comment on some of those positive and negative factors that have come into influencing the achievement in the year and some of the impact that is on your future plans as well. Under financial review, you need to be talking about your performance and your position during the year. You need to be explaining your reserves policy, clarify what reserves are held and why you're holding them and how they compare to the policy that you have in place. You need to talk about any uncertainties about the ability of the charity to continue as a going concern. For larger charities, what is the financial effect of significant events that happen during the year? What is your investment policy? in place, and what's actually been the performance this year. So a lot more expansive comments there. Under structured governance management, what's the nature of the governing document? How is the charity constituted? Really, really important things to include. And then for larger charities, how does the charity make decisions? How does it go about operating? With delegated authority, what decisions do trustees make? What are the areas that are delegated to staff? Is it really important to include the arrangements for setting the remuneration of the charity's key management personnel and explaining how that's tracked and benchmarked and monitored? So, there's lots there. And if you're not familiar with those requirements, dive into the charity SORP and module 1. And there's a whole kind of list there of things to include. But we're just going to mention what we see in practice as some neglected areas. I'm going to cover a few, and then Cecile's going to come in on this too. I think that reserves reporting is an area that is not done as well as it should be, and yet it's a key transparency area. It's so important for charities to be transparent about what their intended reserves target is, free reserves target is, and then to be really clear about where they actually stand and the reasons for any variance between their target and where they actually are. And that's really vitally important. That's a whole session in itself to cover. In fact, it's an area that's going to be covered in the next revision of the SORT. There's going to be some big changes, I think, in how reserves are reported, but often neglected area. Often misunderstood and neglected as well is the requirement, particularly for larger charities, to describe the principal risks and uncertainties the charity is facing. And what are some of the plans and strategies in place to manage those risks? That's not a kind of a 5-page summary of kind of your entire risk register. That's what are the principal risks the charity is facing and what are you doing about those? There's a legal requirement for charities above £1 million income to have certain disclosures about their approach to fundraising, about how they go around about fundraising, how they what fundraising standards they adhere to, whether there's been any particular complaints about their fundraising practices in the year, things like that. And that's often neglected too by charities. And then for larger charities, again, where they're grant making, that they're clear policies around the situations in which they make grants. And also investments policies, and coming to the fore, particularly with thinking about responsible investments and policies around ethics and ESG, just real transparency around policies and approach. And Cecile, why don't you just take us through a few more neglected essentials around trustees' annual report?
Thank you, Ed. One thing we find people get wrong surprisingly often is their charitable purposes. Ed pointed out you must put them in the trustees' annual report. Should be the first thing in the document in my book, both in importance and often in the order in which you show things. It's the absolutely key reason the charity exists in the first place. How do people get it wrong? Sometimes they omit it altogether, utterly astonishing. Sometimes they state it wrongly. They state an out-of-date version, or they state something that is not the purpose. I often see people state something like, say, a mission statement or their core objective for this reporting year, but they don't state the purpose. So whatever you do, put your purposes in and get them right. Quite different charity to the example I gave earlier. I was greatly impressed by a charity that we are working with at the moment the other day when we were working together with them, and they pointed out that their mission statement is in fact exactly the same as their charitable purposes. Now, they have quite short charitable purposes, but that was hugely impressive because they are completely focused on their charitable purposes. Excellent focus from that charity, its trustees and its staff. Also, quite often trustees fail to make sure that the purposes are on the charity's website. Again, to me, that seems fundamental. Why on earth don't you have your purposes readily available, easily accessible, and very easy to find on your website? So get the purposes right, state them properly, distinguish them from the mission statement, and don't muddle them up with your strategic aims, which are important, but subsidiary to the purposes. communicate clearly who the beneficiary group is. That's sometimes very obvious, but don't assume it's obvious to people that are using this material. Remember, this is about wider public accountability. May be obvious to you who benefits from what the charity does, but imagine that you're coming to the charity fresh. You don't know anything about it. And never omit to explain what the wider public benefit is. There may be a focused beneficiary group, but always there is some level of wider public benefit. Explain how that is. How is that there? Make sure that people can readily see the charitable outcomes. An awful lot of effort goes into putting into annual reporting activities, endless detail on them, sometimes too much detail, too many statistics, for example, and lengthy pieces in the report. But the charitable outcomes are often not actually stated. And again, think about pithy output on that. How can you make a pithy statement to the world about what difference was made in outcomes from your charity in the year you're reporting on? And although you might think this is point of detail, again, it matters. It matters because it's a requirement, and it matters to be honest and open with the people. Get the facts right. Check and double check the trustees list. Dates when people joined the board, left the board. Don't say the wrong governing document type. The number of trustees reports we see where they say, for example, the governing document is a trust deed, and it's not. It's a company articles of association or a CIO constitution. If you can't be accurate about that, it won't inspire public confidence when you are attempting to report more complex things like charitable outcomes. Ed, back to you.
Thank you, Cecile. So we're going to have a little think about developments in the charity SORP. I've used this word a fair bit, and you might be thinking, what on earth are you talking about? What on earth is a SORP? Well, SORP stands for Statement of Recommended Practice. And really what it is it's saying, here are accounting standards that people all over have got to apply when they prepare their accounts. But how do charities in particular interpret those standards to be able to meet the unique needs of charity reporting? And so the charity SORP has been with us for a few decades now, helping charities to say, how do we present accounts for charities in a really relevant way? It's, as I've said before, it stands for Statement of Recommended Practice. Actually, in reality, it's very much baked into law. So I really should read it as Statement of Required Practice, and it needs a little bit of a rebranding because it's really essential to get to grips with it. And it applies to any charity that is preparing accruals accounts. So if there is, if you are a charitable company, for example, you will always need to prepare accruals accounts under the charity SORP. If you're an unincorporated charity or a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation, and your income is over £250,000, then you will also need to prepare accruals accounts under the charity SORP. And there is a new SORP on its way. Because the SORP is based on accounting standards, there is an FRC, Financial Reporting Council, review of accounting standards, and we're expecting a kind of a new revision in 2024. And so for that revision to be relevant to charities, we need a new charity SORP to interpret how to prepare charities' accounts. And so we are expecting the new charity SORP, as long as timetables don't slip, to be effective from accounting periods beginning on or after the 1st of January 2024. So if you're kind of getting all comfortable and settled in knowing what you're doing with the current charity SORP, don't get too comfortable. We've got a couple of years left, but we've got change on the way. But it's been very interesting the way in which the new charity SORP is being drafted. Actually, there's been a kind of everybody gets to play kind of approach to drafting the new SORP. There's been lots and lots of people involved from lots of different backgrounds, lots of small charities, practitioners, academics, large charities, and involved in thinking about the topics that need to be looked at for the new SORP. So there's been these 6 engagement strands that have looked at a whole long list of things that might be ripe for review. Sadly, that it's not a free-for-all. We can't just completely make it the way that everybody wants it, because of course we've still got to comply with accounting standards up there, but there are some freedoms, and that's what's being looked at. I think one of the really great bits of news out of this is, so literally just this month, the Charity SORT Committee, which is coordinating this exercise, they issued their statement of drafting aims and principles for the next SORT. They laid out 8 principles. And the one that we can be absolutely delighted about, and most people are delighted about, is principle 1. The majority of preparers are volunteers, advisors, and practitioners assisting smaller charities. In writing the SORT, we will keep the needs of smaller charities in mind and seek to provide clarity. I'm going to hold them to this, with language and terminology that is clear and not overly technical. And a lot of us will be kind of getting our party poppers out and saying, isn't that wonderful? We need a charity SORT like that is going to be more helpful for smaller charities. So we're hopeful that that might indeed be the case, because that's going to help so many of us out. But there were 15 kind of big topics, a long list of topics that were considered by these engagement strands. I'm not going to go through each one of these. Some of them will be familiar to you. There's some interesting ones on here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you an overview, but then just talk about some that I think are the most likely ones that are going to result in change. But some interesting things here: summary of financial key information. You know, a proposal that perhaps there might be a kind of a one-pager key facts summary that we might see in every set of a charity account, so we can compare charities and things like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's just far too riddled with problems, and you can't compare charities. They're not widgets. Every charity is individual, and I think it's going to be a challenging one, so I don't think that will happen. There was a suggestion that the statement of financial activities, the bit where at the moment you've got your income and your expenditure and then your reserves at the bottom, that we might flip that completely on its head, and we might start with expenditure. We might start with what we've spent, and then where we got the income from to spend it, and then what the reserves are. To be honest, I think that's freaking everyone out a bit too much, so I don't think that will happen either. I think that's far too radical, so I don't think that will change. But some of these topics are very interesting, but you know, how we account for legacies, how we factor in donated goods and services, how impact reporting can happen much better. So lots of topics there that are very relevant. I think probably the ones that are the ones that are goers, the ones that are most likely to result in change in the next sort of these. And of course, this is complete speculation, so you can perhaps hold me to this later on. I think what we will see is a better tiered reporting basis. We'll see a SORT that has a better distinction between the requirements for small charities and larger charities. Actually, at the moment, a charity with income of £500,000 effectively has the same requirements as a charity with 80 million income a year, which seems wrong to me. And so there is I think a move afoot to have a kind of a better and clearer tiered basis, so that smaller charities are not hampered by the same extensive detail and requirements that larger charities are. I think that there'll be some clarification around income recognition. This is an area that causes endless problems in the sector. You know, when's a grant a grant? When's a contract a contract? To try and be clear on all that kind of stuff. And particularly one of the some people say oddities about charity accounts is so often, you know, a charity can receive a really big capital grant towards, you know, perhaps building a building or purchasing some big asset. And the way that really that the charity SORT wants you to do is bring it all in as income at the start, and you're carrying all these funds until you spend them later on. Actually, I think there's an appetite to review whether that's still an appropriate thing to do. Allocation of support costs. Can there be a bit more consistency in the way in which we describe and allocate supporting, in other words, administration costs, background costs that are essential for doing the work? As I mentioned earlier on, reserves. I think that the next charity SORT will be much more prescriptive on what free reserves are and how they should be reported to get more consistency. I think there'll be a better emphasis on linking the trustees' annual report with the accounts. That's already there as a requirement, really. But you know, ultimately, what the ultimate is to say, you know, this is a key activity we undertook in the year, and then you dive into the accounts and you see this is what we spent on that activity in the year, and I think that would be very, very helpful. And then finally, I think it's inevitable that we will have some kind of regime on sustainability reporting in the trustees' annual report, and I think this would be great. I mean, at the moment, large corporates, so even very large corporate charities, have to talk about the energy that they've used Actually, I think there'll be something like that that will be extended to all charities in a bit of a lighter touch way. What is the impact that your charity is having on the climate, on the environment? Actually, what impact is climate change having on your charity, and to provide some kind of sensible comment on that. So those are the things I think that are gaining traction. Watch This Space will, of course, bring you all the news as we get it. Things are out for consultation, I think, next year prior to 2024. But if you love this kind of thing, you eat this kind of thing for breakfast, go to the Charities Sort Committee page on charitysort.org. The full minutes, the full arguments to and fro, that kind of entertaining discourse on what's possible and what isn't possible is there. I love that kind of stuff. I know that not everybody does, but if you're one of those people, go and have a look at it. There's a lot of stuff there to look at. Cecile.
Thank you, Ed. So that's really helpful about some of what may be changing in the future. What we have now in this session is having a think about some revised guidance that we already have. That relates to charities that operate online. And this is relevant to you however you operate online, whatever way you operate online. It's relevant about the safety of people and the protection of personal information of people, personal data. Now, be careful, I think, to recognize that you will have some online activity. I can think of virtually no charity within the scope of all the charities that Burton Sweet deals with, all the ones that any of us here at Burton Sweet have a personal commitment to. I can't think of any now that has no online usage. We've moved so far in the digital age that almost every charity will have some digital communications between its people and the people it's helping, between its people and those who support the charity. Even something that is not a charity, very often when you've been in touch with it, you may end up then referred on to a charity for something by way of support. Take, for example, when you've consulted your GP, you may be referred on for a 3-course session online in relation to the medical issue at hand, and that may be delivered to you by a charity through your computer via digital media that charity's people are using. So virtually every charity has some online activity. Trustees use it, staff use it, volunteers use it, and those who are there to help use it, and those who are supporting the charity as donors, supporters, active deliverers of your services, all of those use online material. This relates to people's safety because there is effectively now a duty for every charity to keep everyone who comes into contact with it safe. Remember, that's effectively a duty of a general care to the public at large. Don't just think about those who are perhaps traditionally thought of as having vulnerabilities or risks. Yes, think of them, young people, people with other vulnerabilities, but think of this in terms of people at large being kept safe. And again, you see the relevance to all charities when you understand that. Think about it in relation to the charity's website, its own social media. Think about it in relation to all its electronic communications, emails, texts, and also how its website interacts with people. Can they send messages that way? Often they can. Can someone respond to them via the website? Are there ways they can access information via your website? All of those are examples of what might be being done electronically. Of course, sometimes people are using their own social media to share information about a charity or comment on its work. I'd say that's extremely high risk and not to be encouraged in terms of the charity's official activities. You're going to find it well nigh impossible to control content, digital security, or other things you need to have an eye on if people are using their own social media in a organised capacity for the charity. People will behave as they will in their private capacities, of course, and you can only perhaps give guidance, but try and keep the online activities to your official media wherever you can. And the revised guidance, and what's pointing to all of these things, is the Charity Commission's revised guidance on safeguarding, which emphasises the importance of controlling all the online public messaging of the charity and its contents. Tells you to think about content, contact, and conduct. Who controls your online media and who supervises the use of it? How do they do that? What controls are in place over content and communications? Who decides what goes into them and who checks before they go out? Part of the challenge with digital media is it's so very instant. The moment the person has created it, if they have the right access points, the right authorities, they can just hit the button and it's there in the public domain. Who thinks about whether the content and the message is appropriate to the charity's purposes, to its ethos, to its good name? Here's my third real life example, literally within the last few days. A charity that deals with an awful, horrible area of human exploitation reshared onto its own social media a positive endorsement of a particular method of addressing the behaviours of some of those who critically drive the exploitation. Here comes the but. The charity's own policy, having assessed that method, is that it does not support that method. But in social media, it made a statement effectively endorsing with the charity's brand that methodology. Supporters, members of the public, pointed out in response in public that this was a untenable position, and they were actually surprisingly polite in how they did it. And the charity retracted, and it then took down the original post. But of course, by then, who knows how many people had read it and reacted to it, as I did in reciting the story, anonymized to you now. At the very least, that organisation has found itself highly embarrassed. At worst, there may be active harm to it. So think about how charity people communicate with one another, how service users interact with the charity, and how other people access online services and online information about the charity. Do people using all of that know how to keep the charity safe, its people safe, and the people that interact with it safe? Are there adequate controls against accidental data breach, or worse still, deliberate abuse of people and their details, or disastrous internal errors such as the one I gave you as that real example? And also think in terms of the content of the websites, the communications, whether you, the organisation, have the right consents and permissions in place. Have you got those in relation to images and quotes that you use in your communications and your social media and on your website, for example? So it's all about being sensible, taking a wide enough view, and then taking practical steps that are manageable in your circumstances. Yes, it's about safeguarding those who are vulnerable, but it's actually a far wider question about keeping the organisation, those it helps, and its good standing safe when it's operating online. Ed, thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. So just like to open it up really to see whether anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. So what you should be able to do now, if you would like to, you should be able to unmute yourself to be able to ask a question out loud if you like to. Again, we're still keeping an eye on the chat, so do post a question in there. We've also got our charities director, Josh Kingston, on the line here. So he's with us as well. You might want to either add some comments or particularly if there's a question that's like far too difficult for me, then I'm going to ask Josh to answer it instead, because he would love to do that. Any questions at all? Lovely. Well, that's good. We've answered everything, Cecile. It's amazing. It's brilliant. Cecile, would you like to perhaps just give us a couple of news updates?
Certainly. So do please keep thinking of any questions and throw those in. I think the news things perhaps and developments that I'd like to highlight. The Charity Commission still does not have a new chair. The person that was expected to take up the role is not now doing so. The interim chair is therefore going to continue in that role until at least the end of June. And then the other area I'd like to really pick up on is where the Charity Commission's priority focuses are this year. They are around enhancing charity transparency, as well as the things that we see in our work and the things you've asked for. That's another reason why we've honed in on that today. Part of that is about accurate and timely public reporting, but it's also about the quality of all the transparency of a charity in the public reporting and in some of those other areas. Another area it's concentrating on, it is going to make more information available about individual charities on your entry on the public register. Again, give them material that will be helpful to you in terms of its accuracy, the message it conveys about your charity, how it demonstrates the effect you're having. Give them material that will be meaningful to the people that then can access that wider information about you. Don't think of it just in terms of, we do this to keep the Charity Commission happy. So there'll be more data about you publicly available on the register. And then another area, they're going to be making significant changes to how the interaction of their website on how we communicate with them operates. We don't know the detail yet. We just know it's definitely coming this year and it will be significant. Hopefully we'll get some prior warning and hopefully they will have not created any hidden traps for us to fall into. But we are all going to have to look forward to significant change on that. Ed, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions at all? Good. Well, thank you so much for being
Ed,
with us.
sorry, we've got one in the chat there from
Have we?
I think there's a request from somebody for observations about
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Services. I think I'd observe a few things there. Any live streamed event, whether it's a church service or anything else, remember that you do need to make people aware if their images and potentially their voices as well will be made live online in the public domain. So do make sure that there are appropriate announcements, information in the material about the event, the booking form, the programme, whatever. Remember the data protection issues as well around that. Part of those are about privacy, part around data protection. So participants need to be happy if they are going to be seen to take part, is part of the message in the answer to that question.
So, just to say that we are here to help and we would love to hear from you. If you would appreciate, particularly as we talk about public reporting today, if you would appreciate any particular assistance, for example, something we've done quite frequently is to chat to clients about their reserves policies, to make comment on them, to help charities come up with their reserves policies, to be able to just kind of help a clarity of reporting and do a bit of a training exercise quite often for the trustees to understand what it's all about. Whether it's reading through your trustees report, perhaps a bit of a public benefit review and having a little think particularly around your public benefit reporting. Perhaps it's helping you with your risk management and forming a risk register to be able to understand the best way to report on that in your accounts. There's all kinds of different ways in which we can help, and we would love to chat to you about that. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. As I've already said, there'll be a link to the recording from this event, but also the slides that will come around by email. I think that'll be tomorrow now, but there'll be an email that comes around very shortly, just asking for a bit of feedback. We would love these events to be super relevant to what your needs are. So please don't hesitate to suggest particular topics that we can cover and to reflect on the particular needs that you have in your situation. But thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time, and we'll see you again. Bye for now.